Welcome back. My name is Matt Reiners, and I'm the co-founder of Eversound, a company dedicated to improving quality of life for older adults by giving them the gift of hearing. Today, I'm joined by Eric Varin, the SVP of Sales at the Aspenwood Company. I've gotten a chance to know Eric on the conference circuit and have known him on both the vendor and the provider side. Eric is kind, smart, one of the good ones, and I'm grateful to have people like him in our industry. So thanks so much for joining me today, Eric.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here, I'm really excited about our conversation.
I love it. So, Eric, can you share a little bit about your background and how you got into senior living?
Sure, happy to. Yeah, for like many of us in the industry, it was a personal experience. My grandparents were living together in Worcester, Massachusetts, and my grandmother had dementia, but she was incredibly strong and her body was very, very healthy. My grandfather was cognitively healthy, but unfortunately was his body was pretty compromised. So my grandmother unfortunately had a fall and passed away from the fall, and we thought my grandfather was going to pass away quickly after. And he moved into a community in Worcester. And my grandfather was French Canadian, had a full head of white hair and a white mustache, and had an accent. And the ladies loved him. So he was loving his life in his community. He actually lived 3 years longer than we expected. But when you're exposed to the good work that is being done in communities and the impact that it has both on residents and their families, it was kind of like a bug had been kind of, it's like I bit the bug, and I jumped right in. And so a few years after that, I joined Atria Senior Living. It's my first position in New York City. And then I worked my way up in different various organizations to Aspenwood Company, and we're an owner, operator, and developer of luxury IL/AL memory care high rise communities at urban settings. And we also offer some mid market luxury communities as well in 4 different states. So I'm loving it being back on the operator side. It's something that's really in my soul, and I'm glad to be back in the operator side.
Yeah, no, and I love that story, and you're able to see it firsthand, and really, take that. I think that's how a lot of the people who've got in the space, to your point, have come to see it.
Absolutely.
And I was looking, Eric, because you spent almost the last 15 years in senior living in different capacities and different roles. Seems like a lot of them have been like the sales and marketing focus, and I'm curious how you've seen that shift during your time.
It's a great question. I was thinking a lot about when I first started and kind of how we sold. And I think I see four main differences or evolutions, as I say. The first is a more consultative sales approach. I think originally, a lot of times people would try to scare seniors into moving in. And what I mean by that is we use the trick like, well, what happens if your daughter moves away? Or what happens if you fall again? Don't you think it's time to move right now before you can, before it happens to you? And I feel like that was just not an effective way to build relationships and sell somebody into a community and get their buy-in and want them to be a part of being joining that community. So I think for me that was a big one. We as an organization use prospect centered selling in Sherpa, and all we do is focus on the prospect and planning and building strong relationships through empathy and building trust and helping them navigate change. So it's been nice to see that evolution. Um, I think the next is really I'm hearing that companies are starting to be less concerned about chasing metrics for the sake of just chasing metrics. In one of my regional roles, I had a production sales calculator that I had to use with all of my communities, and I would have to take their conversion rates based on in it and to take them with the number of move-ins we needed to tell them what their activities were on a monthly basis. And there were times when people, a community of one had to make 300 phone calls and do 45 tours based on their conversions, right? And it just was silly. I think salespeople in senior housing want to make a difference. They want to have impact. And if we're just having them chase activities, they're going to leave. And it's not a fun environment. And those kind of metrics just to chase metrics doesn't um, cultivate a culture of passion around what people are trying to do. So I'm loving the fact that a lot of companies are stepping away from that. Third is transparency. I think before a lot of companies held a lot close to the vest, and with the introduction of social media, you're able to see more inside of communities. And I know that a lot of us in our roles, struggle with, do communities, can they post anything? Can I first try to prove it before? But I think it's important that we celebrate the heartbeat of our communities through what we're able to post. So I think transparency is huge, but we're seeing it now with pricing and occupancy percentages or occupancy availability directly on websites now that are not gated. And we're right now looking at a provider to do that, so that we will have our communities, especially our new builds, the apartments on a interactive map where they can click in to see what available units there are, the direct cost of that unit. And I think we're seeing more and more people become more comfortable with being more transparent with their pricing. And then lastly, I think it's the push for content. As you know, I mean, Matt, just to share a story, I mean, Matt was so kind to me when I was working at another vendor and was trying to build up my LinkedIn presence. And he sent me these great kind of suggestions on what I should be doing. I don't always follow them, because I just don't have time sometimes. But I think that the push for content is so important, because it's not only content, but it's understanding your community's specific voice and your community's differentiators, so that you can feed content that's really specific to what you're doing. And being okay with the fact that you're not going to be the place for everybody. I think for so long we've tried so hard to market as the solution for everybody in every community, and it's not, that doesn't work anymore. We have to be very specific with what we offer to customers and prospects, and really understand who we are, and the voice that we speak to our customers in.
Yeah, I love the way you sum that up with the different evolutions, and I think from the customer perspective, it seems like it's everything to help them just be better and like just make more informed decisions, and it's a happier buying process, which is just interesting to see. And we talk about the past and how that's evolved, and I'm curious, as you look into the future, it sounds like you're doing some cool things with like the occupancy and being able to look at that and kind of look into that, but how do you see sales and marketing continue to evolve?
Yeah, I think it is first and foremost the reliance on technology and involving different types of technology in your sales process, from your CRM to your website to video to automation to um, there's so many different things right out there, because I think that customers are going to want to be able to understand differentiators and your community's heartbeat through a virtual experience first. And so much of what we do is the experience of what it's like to be in a community, and exposing people to the residents and to the caregivers and to the team, right? And really allowing them to sell the community for you. And how do you do that virtually? I think that is going to be important. And then integrations. To me, integrations are what get me really excited about having all of our systems talking to each other. We have an incredible opportunity to learn so much, not only on how to run the community better and have better health outcomes, but also on the marketing side. Like, I would love to be able to understand with granular specificity what the marketing behaviors of a resident or resident families that have the longest length of stays at our communities, and create personas that way, and create marketing specifically around those behaviors, so I'm attracting that type of resident. So it's, the importance of having your billing software, your health software, as well as your CRM and your life engagement software, everything talking to each other, I think is going to change the way we sell in this industry as we become more sophisticated in how we use our data.
Yeah, I think there's a huge opportunity there. They always talk about big data and stuff, but I always notice in senior living is all these siloed tech offerings, which just makes your guys' life that much more difficult, which, having to pull all those together, there's definitely, yeah, there's a huge opportunity there. And I love the idea of like, looking at those, what you would consider a successful resident and trying to create personas around that and try and go and find more people like that.
Yes.
I know we definitely do that from the groups that we work with. And, I think too, outside of even just senior living, this whole idea of branding, right? It becomes more under focus, whether it's individuals, whether it's companies. Where do you think our industry's biggest opportunity is in terms of branding or rebranding itself for the general public?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, for me, I think the industry overall, I know I do anyways, suffers from what I call as expert blindness, where we think that our prospects know more than they know sometimes. So I think it's a rebranding exercise for all of us. I was at a community last week doing some testimonial videos for one of our communities, and it was so surprising to me that two of the families talked about how they thought what we were doing or what services we offered were a skilled environment, that we were a nursing home. And, being in the industry for 15 years and kind of fighting that fight constantly, I'm like, I shake my head and think, like, how is that even possible anymore? Right. But I think that, especially coming out of COVID, I think we could have done a better job as an industry telling our stories and the good work that we did to support our residents and associates and families. I mean, we did so much in such a difficult time. And I think at times it was lost with the negative noise in the media. And so I think just it goes back to storytelling and understanding who you are and how you're different and why families should want to have their loved one moved into your community because it best meets their needs in particular. Um, and I'm going to go off at a little bit of a tangent on this, but I think also it's a rebranding opportunity with incentives. We as an industry have become so reliant on incentives to sell, which in my opinion has eroded senior living as an industry and as a brand because communities that will fight and throw incentives around just to try to close the deal. And I think now coming out of COVID and really inflation and the cost of doing business, we're changing into a sales model that you have to be less reliant or you can't be as reliant on deep incentives. So you have to be much better with explaining your value and being okay with the fact that you're not the least expensive option or the best incentive in the market and helping the customer understand why you can't be and what that deep discount might do to the overall operations of the community in a negative way. So I think for us, it's also um, exciting to see that we have had to kind of evolve in the I feel like I'm saying evolve a lot today, but evolve in the way we sell so that we can explain our value better. Because it's much easier to just throw an incentive at somebody and say, come on in, we'll give you 2 months free and we'll pay for your move, as opposed to saying, what, unfortunately, we can't offer something like that right now. And let me explain to you why and how that would affect our quality. Um, it's scary for salespeople. So we're working on that right now.
Yeah, no, I think you bring up two really good points. I know before I got into senior living, I thought senior living was all the nursing home, right? And it's so much more than that. That I think as an industry, there's better opportunities to showcase and share those stories, like you said, and not just the stories of the amenities and stuff there, but like the stories of the people there. I'm always amazed when I like go to places and there's former professors or doctors or engineers or like people have just like done tremendous things with their lives, and you're giving them an opportunity to continue to live that life, right? It's senior living, and people are having great times there. And I think to your point of like some of those incentives, it kind of devalues from at face value, right? And if people are just shopping for the best deal, they might not be the best person for your community.
Correct.
Uh,
Absolutely.
and, so Eric, I know during your time in senior living, you have spent some side on the vendor side, the dark
Yeah,
side, some people have called it.
that's what I
Uh,
call it.
yeah. Did you have any like misconceptions, working at or for a vendor that, proved to be false?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest was that vendors just want to sell something to you. Um, what I realized is that vendors are incredibly powerful because they're given kind of access behind the curtains of companies they work with, and they see how things are done really, really well. And though they will never break confidence and share maybe specific things, they're a great resource for recommendations for best practices. I mean, even in areas that you don't work in. I mean, I reach out to vendor partners who I trust a lot and say, hey, we're looking at this, or hey, what have you seen that's been really effective for this challenge? And they're always willing to help. I mean, this industry, especially for those newbies that are just getting started, is incredibly small. So relationships are incredibly important. And those relationships will last a long time. And I think vendors can be so helpful to the success of your business, um, especially as a sounding board of kind of what's out there. You all have such great access to everything that's available, especially when you go to the conference circuit and you can kind of see everything in one space where a lot of people are not able to attend those types of events. And so just your exposure to what's available to us to do better work is incredible. So I value my vendor friends very, very much.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point that I've something I've always struggled with because there's definitely like the champion accounts that might be using your service like exceptionally well, and like you want everybody to be as well as them. And then there's the groups that aren't doing so hot for whatever reasons. And like, how much should we be sharing the best practices with them? I mean, you could definitely craft it in certain ways to not really, give up that level of secrecy. But yeah, it's always something I've kind of internally struggled with. And I think to your point too, like we've I'd like to think we've got a good pulse of what's out there. So when you're looking for things that maybe vendors might not directly be able to help, but they might be able to point you in the right direction or get you in contact with one of the right people. Cause I think on the provider side, there's a lot of just amazing people, just like, so kind, just so genuine. And I think you're starting to see those more on the vendor side, at least the ones that stick around for a while. And they're really in it to just help and, ultimately just improve that quality of life and help you guys be successful.
Yeah.
Um, and as a vendor, how can we better support our provider partners?
That's a great question. I think for me, what I find is helpful is there's a lot of competing priorities being back on the operator side, from investor conversations to leadership conversations to marketing to sales to trainings to process and procedures. There's a lot. And so focus on understanding your provider partner and their individual needs and how you add value to that need. Don't assume. I think so. It goes back to expert blindness, right? But y'all are experts in what you do. Don't assume that we understand everything, or we're maybe using your product for what it was originally designed for. You know what I mean? I think what I mean by that is, you may be trying to, you know, promote a certain way someone is making videos in their community, right? But did we confirm that that was important to that professional partner, or do they want to use it in a different direction? So I just think it's important to understand really their individual needs, and don't assume, and then just add value that way, because ultimately we want relationships that can add value and drive results. Um, as I said, a lot of my closest friends now in senior housing are from vendors, and you all are such an incredible asset to the industry overall. Um, and you want to affect change just like we do.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, when we're talking about that and some of the things that, and you've had so too many or many interesting roles, right, on both sides of the coin here. And it's just such a great point. Cause like what I've learned is that I could be inspirational all I want in terms of like use cases and stuff, but I need to be more directive and like really just identify what that person, I find it like a needs assessment, right? Just kind of like understanding where they want to use it and be successful, and just making sure that we're crafting the onboarding and the experience to really maximize that, and also providing other pieces of information to help them be successful that way.
Yeah, I
Um,
wrote a note to my team today about outreach, and I left them with the question, you know, there's a difference between being liked and being effective. And so, I think to your point, I think that's the balance of the personality and the inspiration, but also how you're adding value to that individual to help them do their job better. So I know it's a tough struggle.
Yeah, absolutely. And so my final question here for you, Eric, probably my favorite question. If you were to give other providers just three guiding principles as they move throughout 2023, what would you say?
So I think there's three. I think we've touched on some of them, but for me, first and foremost, content is key right now on being sure that we are feeding information based on our customer personas when they want that information. Then a one size fits all um, kind of plan for content doesn't work. And content is incredibly complex with how you do SEO and link it to pages and stuff. So have an expert on your team that really allows you to understand how to best leverage your content. But content production is highly important, especially to position yourself as that expert to families and build trust. Um, I think going back, be okay with not being the cheapest or offering the cheapest incentive. And this is probably more for salespeople than leadership, because I think leadership, we do want to be okay with that. But I think when you're in the seat and you have, um, occupancy goals, you may be a little bit behind, you want to throw an incentive, right? Because you think that's going to work, and be okay with not doing that and holding true to your value and understanding how to explain that to families so that they buy into why you're not offering that incentive. Um, and then lastly, it's being comfortable with the transparency. I think a lot of companies are starting to lean into that to different levels, and customers want that. They want to be able to find what information they want right now. They don't want gated pages, and they don't want, just starting at rates and then having to fill out a form. I think we need to be open with sharing because it will allow us to, again, build trust with a prospect coming into our communities from the start, not feeling like there's a kind of a cloak and mirrors, or smoke and mirrors, I should say, kind of relationship with them. So I think for me, those are the big things.
Awesome. Well, Eric, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciated it. I know our listeners will get a lot out of it, and I'm just grateful for you and keep up the awesome work.
Hey, thanks, Matt. It's great chatting with you.